Alright, we are back with another how-to.
Good.
Where we're going to learn you to do exactly that. Today, today we're going to bring up a topic that we've really only touched for most of, and really only hammered in one of, and and that's triggers. Because
they are the core of the game.
And we've really only talked about stands ever. It's something I realized, mostly because they're very polarizing on what to do. Primarily because
They're controversial.
yeah, because they work very differently. We'll get to them.
They have more glaring shortcomings than the other ones do.
But we'll get to that one when we get to it. We're going to basically talk about each of the triggers this time. And just say, well, our piece on them. Why they're good, why they aren't good, why you should use them, and what the best increments would be.
So, how about those heel triggers?
Yeah, let's start with heel triggers. Well, I think this one's pretty easy, actually.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for the most part, it's common sense. They're limited for a reason.
Yeah, limited 4, so obviously run 4.
Yeah. I mean, it's not always the case. If a deck you're in particular, is just really good at the whole early guarding business and is just really, really aggressive and doesn't have any particular need for a lot of counterblasts or whatever. Okay, you can make a case for less, maybe even no heals. I mean, that does open the door for 16 crits.
I'm not saying I'm not saying you have to use heals, but I'm saying more often than not, you're probably going to run the heals.
I can't think of an example of a deck that can run no heals. Give me an example.
Sternblau Kluger.
Sternblau Kluger.
All in, full man mode.
In other words, decks that either do what they do right there, or they're just going to lose anyway.
Yeah.
There is no return.
Ironically, it's when a deck is arguably not good, is where you can run no heals.
Pretty much. And it does, it will catch people off guard, admittedly.
It really will.
Because the odds of double critting
skyrocket.
Yeah, they're
much higher. It's going to happen. If you get a trigger, it's going to be a great.
Any given trigger, it does give you that security of knowing, oh hey, if I trigger anything, they're going to take extra damage. So.
Yeah, even if it's crit and stand, you're going to be taking extra.
Yeah.
But yeah,
clear 4 heals. Just
pretty.
Do it.
Don't be that one Aquaforce deck that runs the 16
or
stands.
Run 16 stands. In Aquaforce. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward.
Especially for your limit break decks, which is almost everything.
So it'll take us to the next one, and that what's usually considered the other important trigger. Crits. They're good.
In most cases, you don't live without them. You're gonna lose the damage race if you don't have at least some capacity.
Yeah, even though they're not limited, although a lot of people
a lot of people believe they should be.
Which is fair enough in a way. I mean, heals, they keep you in the game, but as we've played this game, it only does so much.
Staying in the game only means a little bit.
But that crit
it's really more about killing your opponent first.
And those crits will end that game faster. So I could see the argument of limiting crits to 8s.
Or whatever other alternative people come up with. Like, can't assign more than 1 crit to 1 unit. Or
that.
Whatever.
Point is that giving extra damage in this kind of game, because like we mentioned a while back, field advantage, field presence is much more important than your hand advantage, and you can make much more field presence by killing your enemy to death.
I'll kill you to death.
It's why that card is used more than the draw trigger.
Which we're leading into, I guess?
We could lean into it, but I want to talk about crits more. They're important.
Okay.
Well, they typically make up for
They make up for shortcomings.
decks just building up more slowly. They can also
They're really,
benefit things that are really, really fast. I mean, they go everywhere.
they can go for any kind of deck, any kind of game state. They're the cards that make your other columns just as threatening as your Vanguard.
These are,
It's very-
why you guard it for. It's hard to say anything other than they are the best.
Are the best. Most decks you'll see will run at least 8. On average, 8.
Yeah.
And that's because of the next one, the next two triggers we're going to talk about. I guess we'll start with draw, since Emily wants said we could segue into it.
Yes. Now, draws
At
have
first, let's start with a history lesson. At first, when the game was more new, the common populace, which probably still exists, is after heals and crits, draws are the next thing you would run in your deck.
always
Because
well,
it gave you extra cards. It was a
And
no-brainer at the time.
you needed those extra cards because those young decks didn't
Just
have
any.
engines really.
Yeah. Times have changed since then.
Yeah, a little bit. It's not to say draws are like
Let's say they're like crap or anything.
their weaknesses have become more apparent over time.
Primarily the fact that, there's actually a list of
Like
things. Let's start with the first
you
one.
have to flip them early for their additional card to mean a lot. I mean, the whole idea is that these things are giving you something else to use, and they're really awesome when your field's not full yet, and they help you get there. But if you're only playing, 4, you're not going to see them that often. And if you play more than that,
You have to get
they have
there.
5k shields. You're going to die.
The other guy, and that leads into the next problem they have, which is, they draw.
It's a random card.
It's a random card. It could be a card you didn't want to draw, like another trigger.
Depending on your deck's overall power capacity, it might not be a good thing, especially if you run up against tankier decks. Deck out it's an automatic loss, so it's something to keep in mind.
That's another 1/2 deck loss. You could draw out all your cards. I think that happened to you. Because of the draw triggers, you drew more cards than you were.
I have lost a couple of games because of a draw trigger when I had 3 cards left. Yeah.
So yeah, it becomes more dangerous when you look at it because you're getting a 5k shield that might steal away your second trigger, which always sucks, especially when you have to bank on getting that second trigger to do something.
Then, as the game goes on, they just become less relevant. You get this draw trigger on your drive check, and you're like, oh, well, I'll take the card, but what is this doing for me again? It's not a threat to your opponent unless they're at 5,
Yeah,
at which point any other trigger also is, so it's not really much of an advantage.
Yeah, it's become a card that doesn't give you as much now, mostly because decks have engines, like you said. They can generate the cards that they need by themselves, usually. Or have other cards that can do it for them.
there's this whole mathematical thing where, like, each trigger is 10k shield plus an effect, whereas draws are usually 10k shield and nothing else because of what they drew, and most shields in your deck being 5k, you know. So offensively they have a problem. Defensively they are like amazing, but your odds of damage checking them are not astronomically high. So it's like, you do have those games where you win by the skin of your teeth because your 5th damage check was 1. But
But relying on that is probably not a good idea when you could be relying more on killing them dead with a crit or the card we're going to talk about, or the trigger we're going to talk about next.
and, well,
My last thing to say about draws, I think that's pretty much
That's pretty much.
everything.
they are
about
your
them.
generic filler for when stands just don't work in a deck.
Yeah. Which we're going to
And
talk about
they don't
now.
like have access to 12 crit
Or they only have rainbows.
yeah, whatever. There are reasons to play them,
That's good too.
especially if they have good effects, like solid effects on a 5k shield.
Like Margal.
No problem. Margal, Gatling Claw Dragon.
Alright, well, I guess it's time to go to the final trigger, which its history is kind of the reverse. The stand trigger. In the beginning of this game, stand triggers are considered the worst
They were,
trigger.
you know, kind of difficult to maintain. There wasn't a whole lot that directly synergized with them.
And it was, and the decks were pretty slow. So, it was,
Admittedly, the CEO Overlord Bart Gall hybrid of madness was like the most amusing thing ever, because you could set up those stands, and then once you got the stand on top of your deck, I'm gonna activate Overlord's Counterblast and just fun times. Of course, no one knew about that deck.
yeah. So, now we cut to now times, and, well, they're actually pretty good now. Like, people will probably argue that, but those people are scrubs.
You're getting this just insane surge of new 11k and higher attackers.
Lots more of things that do things when they hit. You know, drawing cards, giving powers or abilities to other people if they hit, etc. Unflipping damage. Like, more of these things are existing, and therefore there's more things that your opponent's wanting to block.
And it's getting to be easier to just get your field and keep it there. Well, at least until Eradicator Land.
But that's for another time. So in decks that have a lot of these, you know, with the big attackers or the effects for hitting, why wouldn't you run stands? Because what it will come down to, when you do that, you'll attack with at least one column first. You know, so either one that has a big attack in the front, or one that has a good skill in the front.
Hit a rear guard so you can threaten them with the criticals instead. You know,
Yeah.
these just sort of work together.
Yeah, stands and crits are like buddies. Because
The
either
threat of one opens up the door for the other to shine. Like, oh, I'm at 5, no need to worry about crits anymore. Well, I've got bad news for you.
revolutionary stand.
Oh, well, I'm at 4, I don't have to worry about those stands, but...
Quit. Stands do something that draw triggers just can't do anymore. It's
no other trigger can, really.
It's be threatening by forcing an extra 5k at least, no matter what the situation is. Even if you had that perfect guard ready for that crit, well...
I've actually seen a lot of games stolen by a stand, not because of someone necessarily playing wrong. Well, it sort of comes down to being a misplay, but they use the cards in their hand primarily, but then the stand comes along and they've still got an intercept on the table, and if they had used it earlier, this situation wouldn't have come up where they're 5k short of living, because you get that poke at their rear guard, and then your other attack goes through.
I think what you're trying to describe is that it's more of a people don't understand stance.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's that too. In fact, I know one person in particular, and I think they know who they are, who got extremely salty when my gold palette, not my gold palette, what's my gold palette?
Royal.
It was Royal Paladin, I think.
Because they
Beat
got
them.
the new stands in them.
No, it wasn't recently. It's relatively old. But the person knows they are. I won because I topped the stand trigger. Like I said, I think it was, I fought them using my Battle Sister deck when it was fully proxied. And then that person constantly bitched that I only won because I got that stand trigger.
Well, yeah,
And,
but
well,
you can say that about
well,
a
you
lot
can
of things in a lot of situations.
That's basically Coco's life story. You only won because you got the crit.
Yeah, it is. It is Coco's life story. You got the trigger because you drew all that other crap, so you didn't deal with it. But yeah, stands do something really good. Give you another chance to attack with a number that will make them at least drop something. Whether it be they don't want the effect to go off or that they can't afford to let it hit. And I thought we'd bring up this again because we, well, the game has grown up since the last time we mentioned triggers.
It's a big boy now.
Yeah, were you going to say
It
that?
really is. Now, obviously, it stands, well, they do still have shortcomings.
Oh, yeah,
like,
still got
you run into a cross ride and you're like, oh, this doesn't do anything, does it?
Unless of course it's Royal Paladins.
Unless your name is Palamede.
Because Palamede will still hit it. Or if you're Dual Axe Dragon.
Yeah.
If you've been painting their field this whole time, stand Dual Axe, he can hit.
Most of the time they're just used for hitting rears. And making sure something else connects that they may not have wanted to deal with.
Yeah. And if nothing else, it's a nice 10k that you can drop later.
Yeah. Just a minor risk of misfiring them early on because your hand was weak or what have
It's
you.
always a possibility. Although, if you get it like, during your early game, when you have a bar in the corner, attack with bar, attack your Vanguard, stand bar.
Why you don't need to feel pressed to play a whole lot of them unless the deck's entire gimmick revolves around it.
Okay, you fish, man.
Fishman. That's a new one.
Half Black Force.
Yes, them.
That's really all there is to say about triggers. What is the most common lineup you usually see that I had to ask?
4-8-4 with draws.
That or
just because they're a bit more multi-purpose and, comfortable and seamless in the majority of deck dynamics.
At least for now.
that or 416.
Because,
That's not 60.
412.
412.
Yeah.
but at least for now, because once we get into that, everybody's 11k and everybody's got guys who hit for at least 12. Nope.
Yeah, you might be able to manage rainbows. You probably don't want to.
Yeah, but more than likely it'll be 4-8-4 with 4 being stands because everybody's hitting for a good number against everything.
You can play like 4-6-6.
Or you could do
like
that.
with draws or stands alongside your crits. But basically, crits are going to be your majority.
Crits and heals will most likely always be there is I guess the point we're trying to make.
Can't displace them. They just do what they do too well.
Yeah, and then the other two depend on what do you need more of. And me personally, at least with the decks I play, those stands are more important than draws, with the exception of maybe Deep Police. Deep Police like those draws because they don't have anything to stand, usually.
Unless it's that Laurel. Stand in the Vanguard.
Yeah, unless you were running it with Laurel and you really want to stand whatever's good and rested by Laurel, I guess. But my point is, draws usually go to things that don't, and stands usually go to things that can. So it's really based on what do you need more of. But you'll always run heals and crits, trust us. They're just too good. I guess that about does it for this How to Vangood. Any final thoughts or anything?
I wanted to know, do you guys think that we will ever get a 5th trigger? And if so, what do you think it would be?
I guess it could happen.
It can, but I don't feel it will, just because all the bases are covered, really.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, what would it do, really?
Anything else is just kind of going a step too far.
The only one I
Like
could
grade
really
4s?
Yes, kind of like that.
The only one I could really think of is a soul charging trigger, and that would only be good in some decks.
Even in them, it's like
Yeah,
that's not an advantage. That's just maybe you get something that maybe you can use.
I remember tinkering around with the possibility of double triggers in exchange for not being able to use the other versions of their kind and only being able to use like maybe one or two of. You can play double triggered. Like,
and suddenly they become like climaxes in Weishvar.
it's kind of where I got the idea from.
That, or I would imagine the double ones would be that you don't get the power boost, you just get the effect, but it happens twice. So the stand trigger
Or
would be
maybe that,
stand
yeah.
2 units, but neither one of them gets +5.
Yeah, no one gets. Yeah, I have to work 2. No one gets a power boost, but you get to do it twice. So you can stand a whole column, but no one gets power.
I mean, in general, these like it's not even necessarily about effects. They can just there's a lot of room for triggers to become more interesting
I got like
just by throwing skills on them.
I got a new trigger, power trigger.
10K.
Plus 10K. That's what it does.
It's just vanilla.
It's just straight up just power, and that's it.
You know, when I'm really thinking about it, that thing would be that might actually be too good. Because you damage check that, you're untouchable.
Yeah, that's true. You get
that's not
5K to my
fair.
Vanguard and 5K to my Vanguard. What? Come at me.
Better.
I've seen
Get
other
two of
ideas
them
thrown
on
around,
check.
like, you know, the drop trigger. No.
Oh, you drive check, it's your opponent has to drop a card. Nubatana's best
No, I got
friend.
one. The shield trigger. Plus 5K shield to 1 unit on the field. So a grade 3 would gain plus 5 shield, or a grade 2 that has only 5 would get plus 5. Increases your shield value to one of your units.
So that would mean that if you
That
drive
is
check that, you
effectively the idea behind the power trigger, but strictly defensive.
Yeah, it's a defensive power trigger.
I don't know. And then you get into the whole, you know, these triggers counteract each other. And if they were going to release new ones, they would probably be in pairs.
It's true.
And that's a whole other can of worms of coming up with what 2 different things do we do.
Yeah, or yeah, I also think. But if I were to say one that had most likely chance, based on what we just said out here, probably the shield trigger. Just because you don't, just because you can't make it, you know, plus 10 to your Vanguard.
If they
or something.
didn't make a lot of these clan gimmicks like the drop zone revival or the damage zone swapping, like those could become
Those
things.
could have become things.
who knows, this might be something they might be tinkering with in the back rooms.
Speaking of Weishvarts, actually, you know, there are several just different trigger types in that game. Like, the stock trigger, which adds to your, well, stock. It's basically what you use to spend on abilities and whatnot. There's also the salvage? No, not necessarily. Point was, you get a card back from your discard and add it to your hand. Maybe it was the topmost card or something.
I think you can see that. Bring back a card. It'd be especially useful if you needed to block and then a trigger came that you weren't expecting, so you had to take an attack.
I mean, draws sort of act like that, but these could emulate them, but be more useful for certain decks.
The grave digging trigger.
Pretty much.
No, it would be the grave robber trigger.
I remember Grave Robber.
I didn't play Yu-Gi-Oh, so I don't know.
They could potentially do a lot of off-the-wall things with these, like
true.
shuffle.
The shuffle
Or,
trigger. The call trigger.
Bounce trigger. Bounce is actually another one from Vice Cards. You pick one of your opponent's characters that's on the stage and return it to their hand.
Actually,
That would
could
be if
interesting.
you're going
Bounce
against-
trigger, if you bounce one unit on the field, one rear guard on the field,
Yeah, I think the
Either
bounce would
side,
be for
maybe.
the.
either side. That way,
Yeah.
because that way it could also be offensive and defensive one. Like if you had to be stupid early on and play like a bunch of ones, and make a 1/1 column, and you didn't
Yeah.
want to have to, and you get a bounce trigger, add it back to your hand.
That would be great for review to try.
Or if you had to play a 3 and
Oh,
you didn't
yeah,
want to,
yeah.
same thing.
If
Yeah,
you're-
greeners would love it too, yeah. So maybe even bounce trigger could be an interesting one to just bring over from White Swords.
Yeah. There's a lot of possibilities. I bet they're testing these at Bushi
They
Road.
could be, but they're probably working more on their buddy fight. That's my new thing whenever I'm calling about cards.
Though, more useless ideas I've seen people come up with. Rest trigger. Yeah, no. Stands already have their opposite in the form of draws, really. And it really wouldn't benefit anyone except during really specific time windows that don't matter.
The null trigger. If you should take it, one attack won't go through. Has to be given somewhere, so if you got it during your attack, well, I hope you attacked with your other rear guards already.
They could do a lot of things. They probably won't. I don't expect them to.
I was mostly because
It would be a very easy way to shake up the game, though, but they seem to be more thought intensive on how they go about doing that.
Yeah. Then they're probably working more on their well, again, their new game, because they seem to be really excited about it.
Yeah.
But we'll more on that when we get more information on it.
And they already gave us Lock, which is it's a pretty big deal. So
Yeah.
you know, give that time to stew.
Lock trigger.
I think it is going to be a while before they do another big game changer like Lock.
The lock trigger symbol is a red ring and then a +5 underneath it. Well, I guess that does it for this out of Vangood. If there's anything anyone wants to know or wants to ask us to make a video on, just comment below and we'll try to get to it if we can think of anything lengthy to say like we did now. Hopefully with less tangent about what kinds of triggers.
I thought it was a good discussion.
It was a good discussion, and this time it actually did relate to everything, so I'll let it go.
Tangent Woman didn't ruin everything. Yes!
As far as you know.
See you later, everybody.
Bye.